Hello everyone and welcome, possibly back, to Suspicious Silence Paranormal Reviews. Today's video is a big one for two reasons. Number one, I just broke 500 subscribers, so thank you very much to everyone who subscribed. I wouldn't be doing this without you and I really appreciate all of your support. Number two is that this is my first viewer request video. Josi from Germany asked me to tell and review the story of Don Decker, aka the Rain Man. Thank you so much for watching, Josi, and if you have a request for a story that you'd like me to review, only two things you have to do. Number one, click that subscribe button, and number two, leave your request in the comments below. The page is growing quickly, but I really do try to read every single comment. So with all that, let's go ahead and get right into today's story. This story is about a man named Don Decker and his short-lived but terrifying experience that he had with an angry spirit or possibly a demon that gave Don his nickname, the Rain Man. The case itself is an older one, with the events having taken place in February of 1983. However, the things that really stand out about this case are not only the extraordinary events that occurred, but the multiple, highly credible witnesses that experienced all of this as well. Don Decker's early life was a troubled one, as he suffered physical abuse from his grandfather as a child. Don never told his parents, or anyone for that matter, about this abuse. This led to a lot of animosity between Don and his parents, because his parents adored Don's grandfather. The animosity continued as Don grew into a young adult. He ended up getting involved with the wrong crowd, which his parents, especially his mother, did not like. This came to a head when Don was arrested at 21 years old for receiving stolen property. His mother had basically disowned him at this point, and Don was sentenced to a year in Monroe County Correctional Facility, a prison in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. The warden of the prison, David Keenhold, was a witness to some of these events and has gone on public record saying so. However, when Don first got to jail, Warden Keenhold said that Don was a very quiet, introverted person. He didn't fly in any of the social circles that people usually do while incarcerated, and it seemed like Don wanted to just quietly serve his time and get out so he could begin the process of turning his life around after some of the mistakes that he's made. In February of 1983, Don's grandfather passed away from cirrhosis of the liver. Because of Don's exemplary behavior and him not being viewed as a danger to society, he was granted a furlough for the weekend to attend his grandfather's funeral. Even though Don would later state that he didn't want to attend the funeral, he ended up going anyways. Perhaps out of respect for everyone else in his family, but more likely just a chance to get out from behind bars for the weekend. While Don was at the funeral, he was sitting there listening to everyone sing his deceased grandfather's praises, saying how great of a person he was, when in Don's mind, he knew that this man was really a monster. He absolutely despised his grandfather, and had stated that he remembered thinking at the funeral how glad he was that his grandfather was dead. With his death, Don found a sense of content because he knew that his grandfather couldn't hurt him or anyone else ever again. Or at least, that's what he thought. Unable to stay at his parents' house for the remainder of his furlough because of their bad relationship, family friends of Don allowed him to stay at their house for the remainder of the weekend. These family friends were Bob and Jeannie Kiefer, and they were somewhat familiar with Don's family issues, but they believed that Don was really just a good guy who wanted to get his life straight despite his mistakes, and they wanted to help him out with that. Don was very gracious and humbled by this, and seemed to enjoy the time that he was there after his grandfather's funeral. Unfortunately, this time of content and happiness was very short-lived. Before dinner was ready that night, Don went up to the upstairs bathroom to wash up. While he was washing his hands in the sink, Don said that he began to feel weird. The room became very cold, and he described the atmosphere in the bathroom as if all the air was getting sucked out of it, almost like he was in a vacuum. He didn't know exactly how, but he distinctly felt like he was being attacked. In almost a state of panic, he turned his head and looked out the window and saw someone or something looking right back at him. The face was that of an old man grinning at him, wearing a crown on his head. Immediately afterwards, Don felt a sharp pain on his arm, and he looked down to discover what looked like 3 large scratch marks appear on his wrist. And these were the first of many reasons why people believe that this may have been a demonic attack, but I'll cover this much further in depth in my breakdown segment of the video, so be sure to stick around for that, as I have some cool theories and research that I did that might actually shine some new light on this old case as well. Bob and Jeannie noticed that Don was taking an unusually long time washing up, so they called for him to come downstairs for dinner. Don tried to clean up the scratch marks the best that he could, then headed downstairs. When Don came down, Bob immediately noticed that something was just off with him. He described him as being tense and acting very unusual compared to just minutes ago, and his face being white, no pun intended, but almost as if he had just seen a ghost. When Don reached for something across the table, Bob noticed the blood on his wrist. He immediately grabbed Don's wrist and confronted him about it, asking him, "What did you do to yourself?" Obviously thinking that Don had attempted self-harm. Don's demeanor immediately changed from nervous and scared to something blank and dissociative when he looked at Bob and told him, "It wasn't me. There's something up there. It looked like it was the devil." Bob and his family finished up dinner and went in the living room to relax and watch TV and try to just shake off whatever that weird experience just was at the dinner table. But soon after that, the room began to get cold. Don immediately recognized his feeling, as it was the same one that he just had in the bathroom, but this time, he wasn't the only one experiencing it. Bob and Jeannie felt the temperature in the room drop dramatically as well. It was then that they saw something that would change their lives forever. They saw what looked like water begin dripping down from the walls. Not from the ceiling down to the walls, mind you, but it seemed like the water was coming out from the wall itself. They immediately assumed it was a leak, like most people would reasonably assume, but there was no plumbing on that side of the house whatsoever. The kitchen and the bathrooms were the only places on the house with plumbing running through the framework of the house, and the pipes were on the complete opposite side of that house. And when Bob touched the water, he realized that it didn't have the same consistency as just regular water. It was transparent like it, but he said that it felt sticky whenever you put it in between your fingers and then pulled them apart. The consistency of the water would very soon take a back seat, however, as it quickly started pouring this liquid from the ceiling, and only in the living room at that. Bob and Jeannie were frantically scrambling around the room and trying to figure out why this was happening, and Don remained on the couch, motionless, although aware of what was going on around him. He described it as being in sort of a trance-like state that he couldn't quite explain. He could see and understand what was going on around him, but he felt absolutely nothing about this situation whatsoever. So he sat motionless on the couch, getting drenched by the water that was now pouring down on the entire room with his trance-like 1,000-yard stare. Bewildered and dumbfounded, the Kiefers called their landlord, Ron. Bob told Ron that he had to come over right away. Ron asked him what was going on, and Bob just told him, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Please, you have to come over and see this for yourself." So, Ron and his wife got in their car and headed there right away. When they arrived, it was still pouring rain in the middle of the living room. Ron and Bob checked the whole house for leaks, including the bathroom upstairs, but found nothing. So, still at a complete loss, Bob decided to call the police and urge them to send someone over to help them with anything at all in this crazy situation. After some initial hesitance, Officers Ron Bojan and his partner, Richard Woolworth, headed over to the house because Officer John knew Bob Kiefer and could sense that something was indeed wrong. And it being a very small town, they decided to go check out what was actually going on there. Keep in mind that these two have been cops for a very long time at this point, had great credibility, and were both very down-to-earth officers. However, what they saw in the house changed their views on pretty much everything. The two officers entered the house and went into the living room where the rain was of course still pouring down, but something even more incredible immediately caught Officer Bojan's attention. While he was standing across from Bob, about 10 feet apart, the two of them saw a ball of water form right in between them, mid-air, and it stayed there for a second, and they both watched it dart across the living room, all the way to the kitchen where it splattered on the wall. Officer Bojan would say that it seemed like it manifested itself there, right in front of both of him and Bob's faces, because whatever what was doing it, it wanted itself to be noticed. Unable to really do anything about this, the two officers reluctantly left, feeling bad that they couldn't help more. Fast forward 23 hours and the phenomenon was still occurring. Exhausted and hungry because they hadn't eaten dinner since the night before, they decided to go to their friend Pam Scrofano's pizzeria that was right down the street from them. She had visited the house earlier that day and saw the rain in the living room with her own eyes, so she was already aware of the situation. While sitting in the pizzeria, Don Decker still seemed like he was in a trance. The whole lights are on but nobody's home thing really was the best way to describe it. Shortly after they entered the pizzeria, water started pouring down from the ceiling there as well. And just a note, the landlord remains at the house while Don and the family were away at the pizzeria, and the rain stopped at the house almost immediately after they left. Pamela, the pizzeria's owner, had a crucifix behind the counter that she pretty much forced Don to wear, and it turned black and left a burn mark on him when it touched him on his chest. Back at the house, absolutely exhausted and frustrated, Jeannie and Ron's wife, Romaine, confronted Don Decker, saying that this was his fault. They soon began berating Don, yelling at him to stop whatever it was that he was doing and to just snap out of it. But the yelling immediately stopped when the pots and pans hanging on the walls started shaking and banging violently. Then suddenly, something picked Don up off the ground, left him hanging midair for several seconds, and then tossed him to the corner clear across the room. He started to get some sort of clarity after this, but he was in very bad pain as he discovered he had more scratch marks, all in sets of 3, as well as what looked like the mark of a crown scratched into his chest. It was at this point that the 2 officers, John Bojan and his partner Richard Wolvertheded, decided to check back in on Don and the Kiefer family. The police chief of Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, was called in to help filing a police report. The chief, whose name I could not find despite all the digging I did, was the only witness to this case that has adamantly denied that anything paranormal had taken place. He was either convinced or just convinced himself that it was either just a plumbing problem or that everyone there was just faking the whole thing. He actually instructed the 2 other officers to leave, stating that nobody was in any immediate danger and that they pretty much had better things to do. He also told them not to file a report at all and not to even speak about this event ever again. Going directly against the chief's orders, the officers returned to the residence with 3 more veteran officers in tow. They tried an experiment on Don, having him put his hands behind his back, then putting something in his hands. That something was actually a crucifix, and as soon as it touched his hands, Don screamed, "It burns!" and tossed it onto the ground. When the officers picked up the crucifix from the ground, they said that it was actually hot to the touch. Immediately after, it would begin pouring in the room yet again. Don was then picked up by an invisible force and thrown across the room again, as the officers described it as if he was hit by a bus. The officers also discovered 3 new bloody scratch marks on Don's neck. On Don's last night of his furlough, the landlord was able to have an evangelical preacher come over to the house and try to exorcise a demon or spirit that was infesting Don. Every Catholic priest and Protestant minister in the area refused to come by and try to help. As the preacher began to pray, Don would convulse and writhe around as if in pain. All the while, the preacher was getting absolutely pelted with rain. As the prayers went on, the atmosphere in the room began to slowly subside, and a quiet feeling began enveloping the room, and the rain would eventually stop. That would be the last time the Kiefer family ever saw the rain in their house again. The next morning, his furlough was up, and it was time for Decker to return to the Monroe County Jail. Whatever the preacher had done to quell the demon or spirit in Don, however, was only temporary, and it once again traveled with him, and this time, Don seemed to know it. Once friendly, yet quiet and introverted, Don seemed like a completely different person upon his return to jail. His demeanor was downright menacing, and the guards, his cellmate, and even Warden David Keenhold noticed Don's behavior and were afraid of him. It should also be noted that the guards and even some of the prisoners seemed to have heard about the extraordinary events that happened to Don during his furlough, most likely because of the heavy police activity surrounding him and it being such a small town and all. Also, when Don got back to jail, he started to feel like he could control this new power of his that this demon or whatever it was giving him, and it seemed like he was almost starting to enjoy it at times. Within just a couple days of Don returning to jail, him and his cellmate were sitting in their cell when water, again, started pouring from the ceiling. As I said, the other inmates had heard about what happened to Don when he was out, so they were already frightened of him. And when his cell started raining up, down, and sideways and dripping up walls, his cellmate absolutely freaked out, screaming for the guards to come over here and get him out. The guards got Don and his cellmate out of the cell, and the guards' fear for him was at an all-time high now because it was happening right there in front of their eyes. A few of the guards, however, remained skeptical. They were convinced that Don was just throwing water around his cell from his sink or toilet and mockingly asked him, "Hey, can you do that in the warden's office next time?" Don looked up at him with a grin and snarkily replied, "I'll try." The guards left to go to the warden to ask him what they should do about Don. Don describes what happened next as if almost like it was a meditative trance, focusing on Warden Keenhold in almost an OBE type of state, an attempt to get it to rain in the warden's office. When the guards got over to the warden's office, they noticed that Warden Keenhold had a large wet spot in the middle of his shirt. Keenhold looked down and saw that there was, in fact, a very large watermark on his uniform directly on the center of his sternum. This shook up Warden Keenhold because of the impossibility of how water could have gone through multiple doors and solid walls and barriers, it being a jail and all. It was then that Warden Keenhold called a minister to attempt an exorcism in jail. Reverend William Blackburn and Don Decker were then taken to a cleared out common area of the jail, and Reverend Blackburn asked Don what it was that was troubling him, just trying to get a basic feel of Don and what's been going on to him. At first, Don was very meek and mild-mannered when he entered the room with the minister and started talking to him. However, when he told Reverend Blackburn about crucifixes burning him and his ability to make it rain, Blackburn told him to basically stop, and then asked him, "You're just making all this up, aren't you? Wouldn't it just be easier to tell the truth?" And just like that, Don's demeanor again shifted to what can only be described as evil. Blackburn recalls this terrible smell beginning to waft over the room, getting worse and worse. The smell was that of death, and it became so strong that it was as if somebody just opened up a fresh grave in that room. Don insisted to Blackburn, "I have powers you don't. I can make it rain." Don then raised his hand up and then rubbed his index and middle finger together with his thumb, and as soon as he did, a thick mist formed in the room that quickly turned into rain. Now feeling and seeing the distinct presence of evil, Blackburn quickly began praying, despite Don's initial protests. The more Blackburn prayed, the stronger the smell and the rain got in the room. Don was hardly getting wet at all, despite the liquid furiously pouring and flying all over the room. Also, while the Reverend himself was getting absolutely attacked by the rain, the pages of the Bible itself remained miraculously dry. After a long period of praying, the dark energy in the room finally subsided, and Don began to weep. Him and Blackburn hugged and continued to pray for some time afterwards, and it was finally over. He hasn't had any paranormal experiences since. Don still believes that his grandfather was responsible for the horrific events that happened to him. His grandfather, who he says was sadistic and abusive, was still trying to hurt him from beyond the grave, but he couldn't harm him anymore. This story truly is an incredible one, with these claims of paranormal activity being so intense, having so many credible witnesses, and a ton of other things that I want to take a deep dive into. So, let's go ahead and break this crazy thing down suspicious silence style and see how deep this rabbit hole goes. And I'll give you my personal opinions and theories about what could have caused some of these paranormal experiences as well. The first thing I want to touch on is all the witnesses and their very high credibility. Many veteran officers on police force, guards, friends of Don's, priests, and even a jail warden have gone in public spotlight to corroborate these incredible claims, risking their own credibility in the process. These police officers and jail guards are tough dudes. They have seen some shit. For people like that to be genuinely frightened of Don considering he wasn't a hardened lifelong behind the bars type of prisoner, what they experienced must have truly been otherworldly, because they've seen enough horrors in a non-paranormal real-world sense. Like I said, the only witness who refutes any paranormal activity was a Stroudsburg police chief, whose name I couldn't find regardless of all the digging I tried to do online without searching through some public records, and honestly, that seemed pretty unnecessary anyways. Speaking of researching, when I do these breakdowns, I try to crawl through every single rabbit hole I can find to try to find interviews on TV, podcasts, news articles, all that. And maybe it's because the case is almost 40 years old now, but from what I could find, there were only 2 television appearances or interviews with Don Decker or any of the other witnesses as well. The first was a 1991 episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and the other one was Season 1, Episode 6 of Paranormal Witness that aired in 2011. No books, no interviews, nothing. Which is pretty odd, all things considered, for a, paranormal witness such as Don. Usually, victims end up writing books about these events, so this is unusual in that aspect alone. There was an article written for Skeptic magazine in 2013 written by Robert Bartholomew. His main point of contention for the story was that there was no photographic or video evidence of the phenomenon whatsoever. Which is odd, but considering Don was only out of jail for about 3 days, it's really not impossible to believe that they wouldn't have been able to get hold of video recording equipment since 1983 when these events happened. As for photographs, even if they did exist, it probably wouldn't be enough for skeptics to, change their mind because of the fact that it wouldn't be able to capture the rain moving sideways or up walls or anything like that. And since I'm talking about skepticism, it is worth noting that Don Decker was arrested in 2012 for arson charges, and some people out there think that this damages his credibility for the story. While the irony of the Rain Man getting arrested for arson is indeed thick enough to choke on, he was in jail for criminal charges when these events themselves took place. I'm not defending his actions if they're true. I wasn't able to find a final verdict for it, but I just find it odd that people would say that one of those charges would damage his credibility and the other wouldn't. I don't know, I just thought that was weird. Okay, so with all that stuff out of the way, I want to talk about the possession itself. Was it the spirit of Don's grandfather? Was it a demon? Could it possibly have been some sort of psychic power that Don was able to channel? Or was it something else completely? Let's explore this. With human spirits, especially those of violent and malevolent people, they are able to manifest themselves in surprisingly powerful ways. Their activity can resemble poltergeist activity with moving objects or furniture, knocking, audible voices, and even physical attacks. While Don's grandfather was allegedly a bad enough person to possibly fit this criteria, the severity of the attacks against Don don't exactly fit the scope of what I believe a human spirit is capable of. Also, when Don had his first paranormal attack in the bathroom, he said that the face that he saw in the window resembled that of an old man, but not the face of his grandfather. All these things together kind of tell me that it wasn't his grandfather's spirit that was tormenting him, not directly at least. As Don's story continued, he seemed very confident that he could use these powers to control rain, or at least what resembled rain. That has made some people speculate that perhaps Don actually had psychic powers. My issue with this is that if he did, how come these powers only manifested during this very short period of time, never before and never after? I think that if it indeed was psychic abilities, I kind of feel like there would have been more paranormal experiences throughout his life. Not necessarily all the time, but there would have been some strange things that would have happened to him that he should have been definitely able to notice. And that brings me to the possibility of a poltergeist. Despite most common knowledge, perception, and understanding of poltergeists, most paranormal researchers and parapsychologists believe that poltergeists aren't spirits at all. Instead, they are a negative manifestation created by psychokinesis, or psychic energy, and are actually unknowingly controlled by the victims of these entities themselves. These manifestations are supposedly very rare, but very powerful, and therefore can often be mistaken for demonic infestation or possession. Very little is known about poltergeist, as the phenomenon is indeed believed to be so rare. In order for one to manifest, however, it's thought that the negative energy has to build up over a long period of time before it can start to manifest itself, and so the activity would slowly build up over time as well. While Don did have a troubled past and was incarcerated, and therefore theoretically could have had enough negative energy to possibly manifest a poltergeist, it seems out of place for activity this intense to start so suddenly. Although I believe that this is a better possibility than a human spirit or just psychic powers. So let's talk about the most widely believed source of this activity, demonic possession. There are some things that definitely do fit in with this theory, but to me there's also one thing that just doesn't seem to add up with it. For the things that do fit, the violence of the attacks, being able to lift a person and throw them clear across the room takes an enormous amount of energy. Also, people that were around Don and even Don himself recounted that there was an atmosphere of just pure evil during these paranormal events, and his trance-like stares are certainly a sign of demonic possession as well. Really, a lot of things point towards it. The face that he saw in the bathroom window that was wearing a crown, scratches that would appear on Don's body in sets of 3, the smell of rotting flesh during his exorcism. The list goes on and on. There is one thing that doesn't really add up for demonic possession, in my opinion, though, and that's the speed of the possession, completely skipping the infestation and oppression steps that usually occur in demonic cases. One might argue that Don wasn't fully possessed, and this was actually more on the oppression stage of possession, but it's still strange to get to that stage so quickly, even though there have been very notable and well-documented cases where it's happened before. I know this might kind of seem like a small thing or a nitpick to point out in the grand scheme of things, but I felt like it was worth mentioning regardless. With all this information, I do have a theory about what could have happened to Don. With his grandfather being such a negative and abusive person, it is very possible that he could have attracted the attention of a demon that latched itself onto him. And when he passed, perhaps he was able to get his soul. After all, his grandfather died at 61 from what I was assuming was drinking, because it was cirrhosis that killed him and all. So a demon could have possibly been nudging him in that direction the whole time. I'm not giving shitty people a free pass, just to let you know, there's just bad people out there, and you can't just blame demons for every bad thing that people do, so I'm not saying that, just for the record. But with the demon's host gone, it could have been out on the hunt for new prey, and Don kind of fit that mark perfectly. A troubled childhood, currently incarcerated, and being happy and glad the fact that his grandfather was dead while at his funeral, thinking of what a bastard he was the whole time. Put all that together and the new demon might have been able to find his host very quickly. So, want to dig a little deeper in this?
Who's coming with me? Who's coming, man? Who's coming with me?
If you're still watching this at this point, then I'm going to take that as an emphatic yes. So, let's look into another big question I had while I was researching this case. A lot of demons out there are associated with fire and everything like that, so are there demons out there that can control rain? Can they manifest it? Let's find out, shall we? If you look back into ancient times, you'll see that many demons fancied themselves gods and kings among men. This makes sense of this entity being a demon because the old man's face that Don saw in the window was wearing a crown on his head. Demons such as Molech and Baal are good examples of this, as they had entire groups of people that worshipped them in ancient times. There are a few ancient deities that could loosely fit into the category of what possessed Don, like Allah or Ravana. Allah has been recorded in Bulgarian, Macedonian, and Serbian folklore and are considered demons of bad weather, storms, and hail. While these seem like a good fit initially, the folklores record Allah as always manifesting themselves in some sort of either hideous, monstrous form, but when they do manifest as a human, they're always female. The Ravana is a proud demon from the Hindu lore who likes to consume humans and drink their blood. Ravana also has accounts of being able to make it rain water, fire, or thousands of arrows from the sky. The demon is depicted, however, having 10 heads and 20 arms, and doesn't take human form as far as I could tell. There are also no accounts of Ravana being able to control or possess humans, so with that in conjunction of its manifested form, I find it kind of unlikely that this could have been the demon behind the possession. There are many other demons that have powers over the weather and such, but the best fit I could find is a particularly nasty demon called the Deva, also known as a Div. It's a supernatural entity in Zoroastrianism that is said to have been rejected by the gods. They are analogous to demons in Christianity. In early Zoroastrianism, they were seen as chaotic divinities, but latterly became the general personification of evil. These entities are also well known for their control of the elements in Hinduism, like water and air. Seems like a good match. And in Christianity, they lurk about ready to attack the vulnerable. They are attracted to unclean people and places, and like to spend time in locations where corpses are exposed. A funeral seems like a great place for them to just kind of sit in place and lie in wait. So maybe the entity that attached itself to Don Decker was this very powerful demon able to control air and water, which would make sense for having gravity-defying rain, a Deva. If you have any theories yourself, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. So that's going to be it for this video, and if you're still watching this, thank you. A big thank you again to Josi for requesting this video. I genuinely had a lot of fun researching and making this, so good request. If you found this video interesting, please let me know by hitting the like button if you haven't already. I'm trying to upload as often as I can considering the length of these videos and work and stuff, but if you want more videos more often, then you gotta hit that subscribe button to let me know. Also, if you have a suggestion for a video you'd like me to do, then please let me know in the comments, as I really do try to read all of them. And don't worry, I still have plenty more content coming your way. Also, follow me on Twitter where I post video updates and share paranormal stories and news there as well. Thanks again for watching, everyone. I appreciate all of you so much. Until next time.